think a lot of us stepped into adulthood without really knowing how to cook. What I mean is not in a sense that we didn't know how to follow a recipe or didn't know how to cook a few dishes, but in that real practical kitchen flow kind of way. I know for myself that I definitely didn't know how to walk into my kitchen, having just a few basic ingredients on hand and make things from that. I was usually searching for recipes, searching for inspiration on Pinterest, and having overall this very narrow perspective of what it means to be a good cook. I thought that a good cook knows a lot of recipes by heart and knows how to make them well. And although that is a skill that every homemaker can benefit from, I think there's a bigger wisdom behind all of that. And in this video, I'm going to talk mainly about how to approach learning how to cook by not only relying on recipes and instructions and always browsing for the steps that you need to complete before you can put a nice meal on the table, but rather more from the perspective of how to approach cooking with a mindset that although following recipes and learning that way is a good start, we should also consider the ingredients that we're making food from, because I think good cooks know how to make delicious meals from local seasonal ingredients that are in turn also high quality. They know how to make the most of one ingredient that happens to be in abundance, like when your garden is overflowing with zucchini or when apples are in season and you can get a huge amount of apples and then make all these amazing things from them. I think that's what really makes a good cook. And it's also important to know your family, know your preferences, so you can have staples on hand that people can just grab and make breakfast from or snacks. And for our family, that means yogurt and bread, which I'm going to talk about in more detail in a minute. But really, today's video is all about how I would approach learning new kitchen skills if I started today. And along the way, I'll of course show you some of the dishes that I've been making lately, like fresh milled sourdough sandwich bread, a simple Balkan meat roll, homemade vanilla extract that I'm going to primarily use for kitchen gifts, and a very messy Kaiserschmarrn at the end. Learning how to bake with fresh milled flour is a skill that I've really been honing in recently, and it really reminded me how often we underestimate the time that is needed to really understand a new process of preparing dishes or preparing ingredients in a certain way if we start from nothing. I do think each kitchen skill is easier to learn because there is an undercurrent, let's say, of the same logic behind everything you do in a kitchen. So for example, if you already have your yogurt making flow down, you will probably have a lot easier time finding your sourdough flow. So I do think some skills translate to other skills, but just overall, learning any skill is a challenge. And I think that's a beauty of it, really. And also an important consideration, if you're starting from scratch, don't try to learn everything at once. Try to add one thing on your plate at a time. So if you know nothing about how to cook, learn how to cook simple dishes first. How to make a risotto, how to make an omelette, how to make pasta. Then maybe learn how to make some practical things from minced meat. I think minced meat is very practical to have on hand. And then you can go into sourdough and fermenting and making your own dairy products. I feel like many people today think that in a span of a few months, they will learn everything that their grandmothers needed decades to learn. And it doesn't really work that way. While we're on the topic of grandmothers, I always try to emphasize in my videos that I think older women that have been cooking for a long time are a wealth of knowledge. And it really saddens me that a lot of that knowledge is getting lost, at least in my country, because a lot of older women that I know have their own recipes and their own ways of doing things. And unfortunately, they don't really write that down. So my sister and I, we've made it a mission a couple of years ago to really write down our favorite recipes that our grandmother makes. And I'm so thankful I did that, because I know we would never convince her to write them down herself. And truth be told, most of those recipes I actually adapted to my cooking style and ingredients that I have access to. So I definitely cook a lot different than, for example, my grandmother did. But like I said at the beginning, I think the underlying wisdom is still there. And I think it's so valuable to get it in writing so that us future generations can benefit from it as well. By the way, in the video, you are seeing me making a simple Balkan meat roll. It's one of my favorite practical meals lately. And it's also a great example of me adapting the recipe from my mother-in-law in that case, because she's not used to cooking with fresh milled flour. So she always makes it with just all-purpose flour. But I tried it with fresh milled flour and I found out that I need to add a bit more cottage cheese into it if I want it to taste more like the meat roll that my mother-in-law makes. So I did that and we were all very happy with it. And it's definitely a recipe that will become a staple in my kitchen. And since we're in a season of preparing gifts for loved ones, I thought I would show you one of the things that I'm planning to gift this year. I know for myself that I love to get homemade, handmade gifts, especially if they revolve around food, for example, maybe some homemade tea mixes or seasonings. Honey is a great gift. I know we appreciate the honey we get from my husband's uncle, who has a few beehives. And since we're not living on a farm and we are not really producing food for ourselves, other than what grows in our garden, I thought it would be fun to make a homemade vanilla extract, because all you really need to make this is a bottle of vodka and some high quality vanilla stalks. So I did that, I think it was at the beginning of summer this year, so well over 6 months ago, and it was ready last week to pour into cute little separate glass bottles, and I was really tempted to cut that footage out of the video, but then I thought to myself, everyone makes mistakes, so I'm just going to leave it there so we can have a laugh at my expense as well. And that reminds me of another thing to keep in mind when you're learning to cook, and that is don't be afraid to mess up. Because it is inevitable, the first time that you do anything, you never do it perfectly. And I feel like a lot of the kitchen skills are simply a game of what not to do to get to the perfect result. So every mistake that you make, will not to make it the next time you are making something. And at least for me, and I think for most people that I know, to some extent, we need to learn from our own mistakes. It definitely helps if we have some instructions or some guidelines about how to do something. But in the end, we have to experiment. We have to get it wrong a few times to then confidently make it the right way. Also, a great component of learning new kitchen skills and being a good cook, I think, is to know what to do with things that are in abundance and also with leftovers. To know in which recipes you can use certain ingredients up. And for this purpose, what I'm showing here is I'm making Kaiserschmarren, which is basically a shredded pancake. I don't think it's really known beyond the Alpine region where I live. I did grow up with it. It was usually served in Austrian ski huts, and it was something that all the kids ordered. So all the adults ordered traditional stews and sausages, and us kids usually went for something a bit sweeter, and Kaiserschmarren was served everywhere. Plus, it was always something that was in the rotation of sweet, let's say. So if you're from the US, you might be making waffles and pancakes and porridge for breakfast. But for us, Kaiserschmarren was definitely something that was always in rotation. And the great thing about it is that since you basically cook a thick pancake and you shred it, the consistency can vary a lot. So it's very forgiving because you don't need to make perfectly shaped pancakes, or it doesn't even need to be of a certain thickness. It just needs to be a pancake that you can shred. And it's the perfect recipe to use some sourdough discard in, some whey if you have some leftover from making yogurt, some buttermilk if you're making butter. You can throw a lot of random liquids in there, and if you do it in small amounts, even the picky kids won't notice it. And that's another thing to keep in mind, I think, to really focus on cooking from what is seasonal and local to you. Because although I think homemaking videos on YouTube are a great resource if you are finding your kitchen flow and if you're a, let's say, beginner homemaker, you have to keep in mind that someone who lives in the US will probably be making other dishes than someone that lives in Austria or in Spain or, in my case, in Slovenia. So it definitely helps to keep in mind, what do you like to eat? What does your family like to eat? And then go from there. Because like with many things in life, sometimes we get stuck in planning and creating that kitchen flow that we thought we need to have, with a lot of fermented foods and homemade dairy. And then we realize that our family won't really eat those things. So it's better to be realistic and learn the things, and maybe learn to cook some things from scratch that maybe you were buying, have prepared before, and for things that maybe you would like to have in your rotation someday, you have to not only ease yourself into it, learn how to make them so they taste good, but you also have to think about how you will ease your family into liking them. So I know when I first started to make sourdough bread, I was lucky that no one complained, but I was not receiving any raving reviews as well. So nobody said, oh, this bread is so much better than the one that we buy from the store. But I did notice that since we started eating a lot of sourdough, and now a portion of the flour that I use is always fresh milled, because milling my own wheat is a lot more cost effective. So if I can sneak it into any recipe, I will. Now we do notice that when we buy bread from the store, we do notice that lack of complex flavor, let's say. Finding your kitchen rhythms and learning new skills slowly, good for you, but also for your family to get used to the foods that you are planning to make more of. Because for me, health is a big priority. So I am always reading up on new studies and just new information that might shed some light about which foods are beneficial for us humans to eat long term. I don't mean crazy diets, I just mean incorporating more gut healthy foods, more fermented foods in general, maybe a bit more protein. And I do let that guide me in learning new skills, incorporating them into my kitchen rhythm to be able to provide my family with quality food. Because at the end of the day, that is the goal for most homemakers. I hope I did inspire you a little bit in this video, but no matter how many videos you watch, and I think you should watch them because they really do help, but the real learning happens in your kitchen, with your hands, with your ingredients, and even with your mistakes. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Don't forget to subscribe, and I hope to see you next Friday. Bye.